From efforts to eradicate world hunger to building affordable housing, we'll discuss why sustainable development matters. Hello, I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations in New York. Welcome to a special edition of The Heat. As part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, member countries are working to complete 17 goals. They include creating sustainable cities, combating climate change, and eliminating hunger and poverty. Later in the show, my colleague Mike Walter will bring us his conversation with the president of the UN's International Fund for Agriculture Development. But first, a conversation with Maimunah Mohd Sharif. She's the executive director of the United Nations Human Settlements Program, known as UN Habitat.
Thank you so much for joining us. This year marks the halfway point to the Sustainable Development Goals. 2030 is just 7 years away. How far have we come in creating more sustainable cities and communities?
Thank you for having me in this show. And as the Secretary General said, when you talk about the overall achievement of the SDG, before I go straight to the SDG related to cities, the overall achievement of SDG is only 15% on track. The rest are all behind. And as far as for the SDG 11, we just had our high-level political forum last July when we presented the report on the implementation of SDG 11. On cities, communities, inclusive and sustainable cities, is only 2 out of the 11 indicators are on track. When you look into housing, only 2 continents, Australia and New Zealand, have achieved no slum. But globally, before COVID, it was only 800 million people living in slum, and now 1 billion people. And we have 2.2 billion people have no access to drinkable water, and 2.4 billion people, in terms of the tonnage of the sanitation and waste, are not properly managed. So, well, we have only 2,661 days, I calculated just now. When you put 7 years, it looks like, wow, it's still a long way. 2,661 days. We are far behind. So I think that's the reason why this time we have the SDG Summit. Together we have the Climate Change Summit, we have the health, and also we have the finance to accelerate the implementation of SDG, and on my side as a custodian of SDG 11 to accelerate the implementation of SDG 11. We are far behind.
That sounds very dire. How concerned are you about catching up? And what are some of the challenges? What will it take to turn those numbers around?
As a former mayor in Penang and as an urban planner, I'm very optimistic. There is still beacon of hope. Cities still play a very important role. Why I say that cities have a very important role? One is that cities is talent hub, investment hub. Cities is also the center of innovation, center of data. And cities at the same time also facing a big challenge of pollution, carbon emission, traffic. And if we bring in the role of cities to be an urban solution, I used to say, let us flip the narrative that cities is an urban solution. So to me, working together with the cities at all levels, that's why we call for multilateralism, from the national, from the local, and also from all levels of stakeholders to work together. And many cities, at the cities level, they already achieve more than sometimes at the country level. So here, the challenges is that leadership, political will. Second is the governance in the city. I mean, there is, we have the law, we have the regulation, you have the guidelines, you have the tools. Third is the capacity. Capacity here, I used to say that is either it is in terms of human resource, the officers, and at the same time also on finance. So there is hope. There is 2,661 days for us to make things right.
As we know, we've seen record-breaking temperatures this year. July, the hottest summer on record so far around the world. We know that urban areas are major contributors to carbon emissions, but many cities around the world have not made enough or the right policy changes. So what is the most important thing cities can do right now, taking all of that into consideration as they're baking in the heat?
July is the hottest month. In order to tackle climate challenges, I would like to say that we have to have a behavioral change, new lifestyle. Like start with myself, start with yourself as an individual. We have to change our lifestyle. We have only one planet. We have two mothers, our own mother and also the mother planet. And we need to change our lifestyle in the bigger aspect, from the production, from the consumption, and also from when you want to discharge whatever it is. That's why I think we came up with a circular economy, what you call it, circular economy. I think this is very important for us they used to say that, to go away from business like usual. So we have to look into a new model of circular economy, new model of the way of life, and a new model also in terms of our consumption. That's why we had, I think last year we had every year 30th of March is a zero waste day for the UN. So I think this is very, very important when you talk about climate, because we need to bring the terminology, the understanding of the climate to the people on the ground, to the fishermen, to the traders, to the children, and to the housewife, and at the education level. So I think this is very important for us in terms of advocacy and communication. Because sometimes when you talk climate change to the people on the ground, say, what do you mean by climate change? But when you talk about, look, there's flooding. Where do you put your rubbish? You see the flood the whole city. So to me, one is that changing in your lifestyle. Second is advocacy. Of course, third is in terms of the technology and innovation that is needed. Fourth is also in terms of the finance. Sometimes we have the finance, but there's no technology, there's no capacity. It's also difficult. So to me, climate change is always there, but now even more. But we need to turbocharge. We need to accelerate our work or our program or our implementation of the new urban agenda. It's already there. The how is in the new urban agenda. But what is lacking is action. That's why in the GA hall now, I think the SG talking about action. So without action, let us change the declaration to the declared action. And that's what we need at the moment now. Yeah.
And how do rural areas factor into all of this? Because, we talk about the urban centers, but many times it's the rural areas and outside the big cities that suffer the most.
If you look at our strategic plan of UN Habitat, the first pillar is reduce poverty. And we also link between urban and rural continuum. Even though we are dealing with cities, we are also dealing with human settlement. We are dealing with the metropolitan, we deal with intermediate cities, and also with the rural area. That's why that we believe that urbanization is not skyscrapers. If we can urbanize rural area, not into the skyscrapers, urbanize in terms of providing the services that you can get in the city area, may it education, health, job in the rural area. Why should people move from rural to urban areas? Because there is an attraction for them, perception that they come to urban area, they can get a job, they can get a health, they can also get a house, and they can get education. But if we can provide the services that you can get from the big city or from the city area to the rural area, I think that is the best. But of course, in different category, in different scale. So, and furthermore, there are also now we're talking about food bank. And now rural area become a target for food production and bringing back the young people into the rural area in terms of, and when you talk about food agriculture, but with technology, with innovation, so to bring back the talent to the rural areas. So I think this is very, very important that we have a balance between the rural and urban. And also the role of intermediary cities, the small cities around the big cities is very important.
I want to turn to migration. We have seen surges in migrations for a number of reasons in recent years, from conflict to climate change. How is migration impacting cities, and how can cities better adapt to sudden influxes of migrants?
Migrant and urban crisis is very closely related. I want to go back to the strategic plan of UN Habitat. The fourth pillar of the strategic plan of UN Habitat is on urban crisis. And the first outcome is looking into how we deal with migrant and internal displaced person, or IDPs, dealing with the host community. When you talk about migrant, they will go to the cities. Yeah? And then sometimes with this migrant and the existing community, it will also affect and stress the provision of the basic services. There is where sometimes it's conflict in terms of, let's say, housing, water, electricity, sanitation. So when I was in Penang as a mayor, we received influx of Rohingya to my city. And there is always conflict, not only in terms of economic, but also conflict in terms of culture. Culture conflicts, for example, like for just real example, for the Indian, the cow is a very, important for them, and for the Muslim, and then they slaughter cow during the Eid, in front of them. So I have to go down and settle this conflict. That is in terms of culture, so, and in terms of the facilities, and in terms of job, and another one also in terms of security. So there are always conflict, but there is also a good story that I would like to share with you. UN Habitats work together with UNHCR in the refugee camp in Kolabie, in Turkana. We work together with the governor. They give us the land, and we work together with the funder, with the partners. And when in 2018, when I went there, mostly of these people are staying within the tent, UNHCR tent and UNICEF tent. 2018. When I went there again in 2023 during the World Refugee Day, and then we work together, they are already in the home, and they really mix and integrate very nicely with the host community. So there is also a good story to tell, good practices, and with this, the government of Kenya is trying to use the same mechanism in another refugee camp in Dadaab, and they use that process as also to formulate the Refugee Act in Kenya. So there are challenges, but we can also look at the best practices, and hopefully we can replicate in other parts globally when they are facing with refugees or migrants.
I want to get your thoughts on China's smart cities, putting an emphasis on building smart cities. What can other countries learn from China when it comes to that? And as a second part of that question, it's the 10-year anniversary of China's Belt and Road Initiative, helping other countries with their infrastructure projects. Wanted to know if we can get your thoughts on those two things.
Yeah, I visited China many times, even before as an ED of UN Habitat. When I was a former mayor, I visited many Chinese cities. And of course, as you said, China now moving forward in terms of the smart city. We in UN Habitat, we had the flagship program called People-Centered Smart City, and very well jive with what Chinese government is doing. And I'm going to China towards the end of October to be there for the Sustainable Cities Award in Shanghai. And I already asked my counterpart there to bring me to the few program or project in China which shows the smart city, which I would like to see, and then maybe we can replicate in other countries. And they're also looking into the integrated planning. wanting that integrated, because why is it integrated? We need to look planning as a holistic, integrated, and that's what they did it. And one of the areas that when using the smart city, people-centered, I'm very impressed with their housing. And way back many years ago when I went there, you can see people homeless and on the road, but they are really putting up poverty, to reduce poverty, and to house the population, the people from the road. So I think this is one area, and definitely during the Habitat Assembly in June, there was one resolution and people-centered smart city. So my trip in this coming trip to Shanghai and some other areas in China, it will really help me to formulate, because I need to formulate the global guidelines for people-centered smart city. That it will also give me some idea, because they are well advanced compared to other countries.
Ms. Maimunah Mohd Sharif, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
2023 was the hottest summer on record, and scientists say the extreme heat contributed to deadly wildfires, severe flooding, and droughts around the world. The climate crisis has also forced thousands of people to leave their homes and is threatening food security. My colleague Mike Walter spoke with Alvaro Lario, the president of the UN's International Fund for Agricultural Development, about what's at stake.
President Lario, thank you so much for visiting with us. You know, when we talk about small-scale farmers, they're really on the front lines when it comes to climate change. In many cases, they're in conflict zones. They're dealing with, you know, the economic burdens that all of us are facing, and yet they're still trying to provide food for all of us. Give us a sense of just the challenges out there and what you're seeing.
Well, we are seeing increased conflicts, increased forced migration. You have to think that 2/3 of the asylum seekers and people being forced to migrate relate to countries that are undergoing a food crisis. And on top of it, we're seeing more and more extreme weather events, where we're talking about floods, droughts, cyclones. So actually their life is extremely difficult. So during the last 1-2 years, we're seeing many of them also not having access to the inputs, to the seeds, especially to the fertilizers. So they have to choose many times, and their type of choices is planting or eating in many cases. In others, they have to also choose between actually migrating forcefully, or in places like the Sahel worldwide to also join some of the terrorist forces, some of the illegal mining extraction, so their lives are quite hard. At the same time, they're the ones who produce the food. In Africa, they produce 70% of the food. In Southeast Asia, also around 2/3 of the food. And they're the ones, as you said, who are at the front line of producing the food, but also of a lot of the consequences related to climate change.
Do you live in two separate worlds? Because I imagine doing your work can be rewarding in that you're helping the vulnerable. But then the other part of it is you're seeing the vulnerable and their struggles. Talk to us about that dynamic.
Indeed, that's one of the things that I struggle with. I mean, when I visit the field, let me put you an example. The Grand Sud of Madagascar, one of the most poor places on earth. There's no real roads. So when we talk about small farmers accessing markets, that's extremely difficult when you don't have the roads. Just villages where there's no economic opportunities. And we are trying there to create an environment by which you have many of the young, because they are very young population, trying to not only survive, but actually go beyond subsistence farming, a way of really earning an income, having a decent livelihood. So when I visit those villages, what we try to, as an example, we try to produce is bring women around cooperatives, make them, for example, be able to just process cassava, make it into flour, then being able to sell it to some of the schools so that it produces increased also nutrition for the schools, get some income so that they can sell also their kids to school, or very young training. I mean, I remember a woman of 25 years old, she told me, before this training and before you gave me some of the chickens that then I multiply many times, I was just wandering through the streets. There were actually, my 2 children did not have enough to eat, and I was 25 years old. Now I'm proud of myself. Let me show you my house, the house I have constructed with what I have earned. These are the stories I see. Then I come back to the societies where we live and the type of developed economies, And it's very difficult to make people understand what the vulnerable communities in these developing economies go through. It's just not imaginable. It's like going back, in many cases, more than 100 years ago. So I understand the difficulty for many of the citizens in these societies to just imagine what it would look like. But I have the peak to many of this type of the impact of the projects that we invest in and how they transform the communities, how they change their lives, how they provide hope and opportunity of receiving an income. And it's very fulfilling. At the same time, I struggle because it's not enough. It's not enough the type of investments we have. If we want people and a growing population in Africa, we're talking about hundreds of millions of people more, doubling from 1.2 to 2.4 billion, to have opportunities, to really have at least a way of generating income. We really need to invest now. The alternative is very clear. The alternative will be further conflicts over resources, further forced migration, and just many times losing of hope, of not having an opportunity in life.
You talked about infrastructure, and it's interesting. The Belt and Road Initiative is now its 10th anniversary, and I remember talking to a colleague in Nairobi, and she said it's one thing to give aid. She goes, it's another thing to create a highway or a rail facility where if I'm producing some food, I can actually get on the train and get it to the market before it rots. Whereas before, the roads were so bad, by the time I got it into the market, I couldn't sell it because it had rotted. And I never thought of that. But those are key issues. Can you talk about how the Belt and Road Initiative has actually changed kind of the landscape, and does it help to lift people out of poverty in that sense?
So let me start with how we approach the food, issues around food. People just many times think about food production or productivity, but as you said, it goes beyond just food. It talks about transportation, infrastructure, energy, distribution, storage. So if you have the food but you cannot actually sell it, then it doesn't really provide any change or transform the community. As an example, for example, in Côte d'Ivoire, I visited a project by which a lot of women had their mangoes which were being rotten. So we put them together, around 1,000 women, a cooperative with plots of land under 2 hectares. We provided them with the machinery to actually dry a lot of those mangoes, to be able to package them, to market them, and to export them many times to Switzerland in this case. And that provided the income for many of the communities. You were talking about infrastructure. We're trying to work, for example, with AIIB, with the Infrastructure Bank. We're talking to the New Development Bank, how that bigger infrastructure, like the one you mentioned on the Belt Road Initiative, can trickle down to the communities. Many times the financing is not always easy, but there's always private sector capital and public sector capital on the bigger infrastructure. But what's the impact on the communities? What's the impact where the poverty is located? China is a great example of eradication of poverty. I think it's one of the great stories of this century. And now there are programs on rural revitalization. So I would say, to us, the most important part is how the big infrastructure can trickle down and really also right now impact the lives and the ability to earn income of many of these poorer communities.
There's a new study that was out recently where poverty, 4th leading cause of death in the United States, and that's the United States. I mean, when you look at it as a worldwide problem, it's huge. You mentioned China and lifting people out of poverty, and your organization has been a part of that. I was reading 1981, you became a partner in many of these respects in helping to lift people out of poverty. Can you talk to me about this connection with China, what you witnessed there, and can it happen elsewhere?
Well, the transformation of China has been amazing. We know, we can see it, and the more I have been visiting China over the last decade, and even in this decade, it has been tremendous, the transformation. Even some of the projects we had, and as you said, it has been a partner for more than 4 decades. It became, before it was more of a recipient, now it's even one of our biggest donors. So actually they're also leading in the front of how can this be transferred to many others through South-South Trilateral Cooperation, sharing their technologies, sharing their experience. And funny enough, I was in China also last year, where are we? I don't remember anymore when we are. We are in October, okay, so it was this year actually where I visited China. And some of the projects that we had have totally evolved, because it's important that these projects actually are sustainable over time and they continue also producing new spillovers for the communities. So there's, for example, some fisheries that actually had transformed themselves also into an ecotourism. So it had evolved right now. I was there in some of the tea cooperatives that right now we're selling through TikTok. So I was in some of the videos appearing there and how to sell them on different channels. So the evolution has been tremendous. But I think it has been a very, very valuable partner for us, and now also as a leader many times in the eradication of poverty and sharing many of these experiences.
One of the things that I've seen you talk about is measuring resilience, but building resilience. Can you talk about that?
Indeed, for us, it's very important to measure the impact of our programs. So this means we measure, for example, the millions of people that we raise their income, the millions of people who have access to markets, the millions of people who build resilience according to their own. We do surveys to assess how can they withstand the shocks, where there are climate, inflation, other shocks. And they prove that we are also supporting in this building of resilience. It's important that it's not a one-off, but actually when we are not there anymore, that all of these projects continue growing, and they are also rooted in the communities. We work with the farmers' organizations, with the communities, so it's very important that they're inclusive. They're not top-down, they're bottom-up.
One final question, I know you're running out of time. What keeps you up at night and what gets you up in the morning?
Well, what gets me up in the morning is many of the field visits that I do, how we are the organization, but many of our partners were really able to transform lives, to give hope, to give them something that they can really think of and wake up every morning. That also gives me the energy to continue running. In terms of what keeps me up at night, I would say the rapid increase of the complexity related to climate change. I would say we are still not very aware of what the impact is. When I go there, I see countries and regions where it has not rained for 5 years, then suddenly they have complete floods that take over everything that we have invested in. That's the rapid transformation of these impacts and these extreme weather events. I mean, in the last year has been really something that it's keeping me up at night on thinking, how can we do better? How can we integrate this through, I don't know, through climate adaptation strategies, drought resilient seeds, submergible irrigation systems? How can we do better early warning systems to really support these poor rural communities?
President Ilario, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
That's it for this special edition of The Heat. I'm Elaine Reyes in New York. Thanks for watching.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Whether it's about your education, the home you live in, or the items you buy, your money has a story to tell, because every business story is a human story. Global Business.
No war, no one again, he can hold him guns. Words protesters.